All right. We are back here at Song of the Day, coming to you from the Rock Cave. I'm your host, Mark Pierce. How you doing today? Took a couple days off. We had some technical difficulties. You'd think it wouldn't be so difficult to get a microphone that works all the time. Yet I've been through so many of them. It's so weird. Anyway, I think we're back. It's working correctly. What are we talking about today? Oh, so I've been working on some themes, some things when we just like topics for Song of the Day, not necessarily just album releases. So those are some things we'll throw at you every once in a while. And in this case, we're talking about movie soundtracks because I was listening to 2 soundtracks this past week, and I was thinking about it a lot. And we'll get to those soundtracks in a minute, but I started thinking about movie soundtracks in general, and then I realized that the movie soundtrack is dead, right? It's just not a thing anymore. It was such a big deal, especially in the late 70s to the early 90s. But it's not a thing anymore, right? You don't hear about, the soundtrack to this or the soundtrack to that, right? Am I right? I think I'm right. I think the soundtrack is dead. And you can prove me wrong, but I think it's going to be tough. And I think the reason is that for so long, soundtracks were a way to get a collection of songs from other artists all on one unit. So you didn't have to go out and buy 10, 12 cassettes or albums, or they had original music on them and they were just really good. But now you can just go to Spotify or iTunes or whatever it is and make your own playlist, the soundtrack to your own life. So you don't need other people's soundtracks, right? But for so long, that's where we got so much of our music. And you have to go back to 1965, to where it pretty much all started, which is the soundtrack to The Sound of Music. That's right, The Sound of Music is one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time. It's the second best charting album of all time, never mind soundtracks. It was released in German, Italian, Spanish, French, English, doe, a deer, a female deer. Everyone loved it. It was on the U.S. charts in the top 100 for 109 weeks. It was in the top 200 for 238 weeks, years and years. People just loved this soundtrack across the globe. Fast forward a little bit, I think the soundtrack to Hair was a big deal, right? That was a really big deal. Aquarius, Let the Sun Shine In, right? That was a big deal. 70s, when was the Jazz Singer? The Jazz Singer was like mid to late 70s, wasn't it? Another big deal. For us, if you're my age, if you're of a certain age, born in the late 60s, when I was 10, there were 2 important soundtracks that changed our lives. Grease and Saturday Night Fever. Those are the 2 right there. You're 10 years old. I hadn't even seen Saturday Night Fever. It was R-rated, right? Was it R-rated? I think it was. But certainly had seen Grease and those double albums. You open them up with all the pictures and the liner notes and everything and all that great music. So good. So those were super important. A little bit later for me, you have like 1981 or 82. You're getting into Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which had Sammy Hagar doing that theme, and Jackson Browne's Somebody's Baby was on there. You have this one right here, Rocky Horror Picture Show, huge for me as a 11, 12-year-old. Love this, as you all know, if you've been watching the show. Another great soundtrack. This is one of the ones I was listening to last week right here, the heavy metal soundtrack. This one, amazing. I mean, we saw this on HBO because we had HBO in the early 80s. And this has got stuff on here that you would even never know it was the band. You've got a Cheap Trick song there. Does not sound like Cheap Trick. So good. You've got a song by Devo, Working in a Coal Mine. You've got Blue Oyster Cult, veteran of Psychic Wars. It doesn't necessarily sound like them either. So many Riggs, so many great songs on that one. Again, this one, I played that one. I wore it out. I'd have to rebuy it, and it didn't come out on CD forever. Um, a little bit later, you've got, you got the heavy hitters, really. You've got Footloose, Top Gun, The Big Chill. Huge, right? I mean, Footloose, of course. All those hits, all those chart toppers. Top Gun, amazing songs. Big Chill introduced a whole bunch of songs to a whole new generation of people. That had all kinds of great songs on it. Lost Boys, for people like us, people like me and my wife. Lost Boys was huge. That song, that remake of the Call song, I Still Believe. Say Anything for Me, also soundtrack. The first time I ever heard The Replacements, Within Your Reach. She's Having a Baby. That's the mid of the 80s. That had This Woman's Work, Kate Bush. Had Dr. Calculus on it. Had Brian Ferry on it. So much good stuff, and it's all soundtrack driven. Even get a little bit later than that, you've got The Crow and Judgment Night. They were doing stuff, fooling around with heavy music and rap music mixed together. They were doing some interesting stuff on the soundtracks there. And then you got Pulp Fiction. What's that, 1994? The last great movie soundtrack that there ever was. With some 60s surf music on there, stuff you hadn't heard, Chuck Berry. So good. Has there been a better soundtrack since Pulp Fiction? I don't think so. Paul Chabot, you might say The Matrix, but I didn't listen to that one as much as I did Pulp Fiction. So that's my argument. Pulp Fiction was the last great movie soundtrack. Prove me wrong, I'll say that again. Then there's soundtracks where in the 80s you had to buy the whole soundtrack just to get one song because it wasn't available anywhere else. And I've got two great examples of that. The first for me is this one right here. One of the only surviving long boxes I have. Apocalypse Now. There was a time I was obsessed with this movie, Apocalypse Now. So much so that my father thought that maybe I was doing drugs or something. I wasn't. Truly, I wasn't. I was just loving this movie so much. And in order to get the Doors version of the end with the helicopters in it, if you don't know that, you got to check it out. You had to buy this double CD, double cassette. The double cassette was $19.99. Double CD, $29.99. But I did it. That's how much I paid for one song. Same with Murray Head, One Night in Bangkok. You had to buy the score to Chess. Double CD, double cassette, $19.99, $29.99, the only way to get that song. Unless you got it as a 45 when it was out years prior. But that was a great song and I had to have it, so I did it. So sometimes you get soundtracks that only have that one song on it. Obscure soundtracks, Sliver. You guys remember Sliver, the movie Sliver? That has some great stuff on there. The Skin Flowers by the Love Gods, I think, was on there. There was some Enigma on there. And I've been working on a soundtrack, Wanderlust Wednesday, that I have to curate all the music myself. I have to download it. It's not available anywhere. We're going to get to that one of these days. But that's going to be a Wanderlust Wednesday. But we are talking movie soundtracks today. All those things. What's your favorite soundtrack? What were soundtracks you remember listening to? That's what I want to hear. I want to hear you post below. As far as Song of the Day goes, I could have gone with anything on any of these here, but we didn't mention one important soundtrack from the 80s. And this is an artist who put out a soundtrack to a movie starring himself. We're talking about Prince, of course, and the Revolution. Purple Rain, massive hit in the 80s. It's a movie soundtrack, but it's him. That was the difference, was it was all him. When Doves Cry, number 1. Let's Go Crazy, number 1. Purple Rain went to number 2. I Would Die For You went to number 8. This was a number 1 album for 24 weeks. Think about that for a minute. And it was on the chart for 122 weeks. All these other songs should have been hits. Darling Nikki, we all know about that one. Should have been hit. Computer Blue, absolutely. And for me, Beautiful Ones. I don't know how didn't chart. I don't know how that wasn't a number 1 song. But that was massively influential. So that's where you're getting your song of the day today. We could do Beautiful Ones, but we'll do one that everyone, just because, everyone knows it. Let's Go Crazy, Prince. That's your soundtrack song of the day today. We're in at 10 minutes, just what happens sometimes when we're chatting like this. You've got your assignment. Play your favorite soundtrack. The other soundtrack I listened to this past week, American Graffiti. We didn't mention that one. 41 great hits from the 1950s. If you ever want to hear great 50s music, just pull out the American Graffiti soundtrack. It's got Wolfman Jack on it. It's got great songs. Every single song is awesome. But your song of the day is from Prince. That's your soundtrack. I want you to post below your favorite soundtracks. What did I miss? Have a good one. And as usual, I'll catch you on the flip side.
Yeah.